The Siege of Bastogne, December 1944, Battle of the Bulge. The 101st Airborne, surrounded by German forces, low on ammunition and medical supplies, holding a critical road junction in freezing conditions.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, I want to tell you about one of the most desperate defensive battles American forces ever fought. A battle where American paratroopers, surrounded and outnumbered, held a small Belgian town against everything the German army could throw at them. A battle fought in freezing winter conditions, with dwindling supplies and no hope of immediate relief. This is the story of the Siege of Bastogne, December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge. To understand Bastogne, you need to understand what was happening in December 1944. By then, everyone thought the war was almost over. American forces had liberated France, pushed into Belgium and Luxembourg, and were approaching Germany's border. The Germans were in retreat. Christmas was coming, and everyone believed the boys would be home soon. Then, on December 16, 1944, Hitler launched his last great gamble, a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. 3 entire German armies, over 200,000 men, smashed into a thinly held section of the American line. The goal was to split the Allied armies, drive to the coast, and capture the port of Antwerp. It was a desperate plan, but it caught the Americans completely by surprise. The German attack created a huge bulge in the American lines. That's why we call it the Battle of the Bulge. American units were overrun, surrounded, or forced to retreat. The situation was chaotic. For a few days, it looked like the Germans might actually succeed. Right in the path of the German advance was a small Belgian town called Bastogne, population about 4,000. Not much to look at, just another European town with narrow streets and old buildings. But Bastogne sat at a critical road junction. 7 major roads met there. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the roads, and whoever controlled the roads could move troops and supplies. The Germans needed those roads. They needed them badly. Their entire offensive depended on moving fast, and they couldn't move fast if the Americans held Bastogne. So the Germans had to take it. The American command realized this too. They needed someone to hold Bastogne, to delay the German advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. On December 18th, just 2 days after the German attack began, the 101st Airborne Division was ordered to Bastogne. Get there fast. Hold that town. Don't let the Germans take it. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, were the same paratroopers who jumped into Normandy on D-Day. They were tough, experienced soldiers, but they'd been resting and refitting in France after months of hard fighting. They weren't ready for combat. They were short on equipment, ammunition, winter clothing. Some units were missing key officers who were away on leave. But orders were orders. The 101st loaded onto trucks and headed for Bastogne. They had no idea what they were driving into. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe was the acting commander. The division's regular commander was away. McAuliffe was from Washington, D.C., an artillery officer who'd risen through the ranks. He was known for being calm under pressure and for not wasting words.
The 101st reached Bastogne on December 19th. The situation was already bad. American units that had been fighting the Germans for 3 days were streaming through the town in retreat, exhausted, low on ammunition, many without proper leadership. The Germans were right behind them. McAuliffe quickly organized the defense.
He placed his regiments in a circle around Bastogne, creating a perimeter. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment to the north, the 506th to the east, that's Easy Company, the unit that would later be famous from the book and TV series Band of Brothers. The 501st to the northeast, the 327th Glider Infantry to the south and west. It wasn't much, maybe 18,000 men total when you counted various attached units. And they were light infantry. Paratroopers travel light. They didn't have the heavy weapons and supplies for a long defensive battle. On December 20th, the Germans closed the ring. Bastogne was surrounded, cut off. No way in, no way out. The only contact with the outside world was by radio. The Germans attacking Bastogne weren't some second-rate units. This was the 2nd Panzer Division, the Panzerlehr Division, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, elite German units with tanks, artillery, and thousands of veteran soldiers. They outnumbered the Americans significantly. The German commander sent forward observers to look at Bastogne's defenses. They reported back. The Americans were dug in, but they were surrounded and cut off. The Germans could destroy them. So the Germans attacked, and the Americans held. Private First Class George Lewes from Rhode Island, a radio man with Easy Company, later described those first days. The Germans came at us again and again, tanks, infantry, artillery barrages. We'd beat back one attack and another would come. We were shooting until our barrels were hot, using every bullet, every grenade. And it was cold. God, it was cold. December 1944 was one of the coldest winters Europe had seen in years. Temperatures dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow covered everything. The American soldiers had summer uniforms. They hadn't been issued winter gear. Many didn't even have overcoats. They wrapped themselves in blankets, curtains, anything they could find to stay warm. Private Donald Burgett from Michigan wrote in his diary, "My feet are frozen. My hands are frozen. We're all freezing. We sleep in foxholes in the snow. When you wake up, you're covered in ice. Some guys are getting frostbite so bad they can't hold their rifles. But we have to keep fighting." And they were running out of supplies, fast. The 101st had arrived with minimal ammunition and supplies, expecting a short fight. But now they were surrounded and cut off. Every bullet fired, every shell, every bandage used couldn't be replaced. Food ran out. The soldiers went to half rations, then quarter rations. They scavenged from abandoned houses in Bastogne. They ate snow to stay hydrated. Some went days with barely any food. Medical supplies ran out too. The division surgeons set up aid stations in buildings in Bastogne, but they were running out of bandages, morphine, plasma, everything. Wounded men lay in unheated buildings, in terrible pain, while medics tried to help with almost nothing to work with.
Ammunition was critically low. Artillery batteries had to ration shells. Infantry companies counted every bullet. Tank destroyers had only a few rounds per gun. If the Germans launched a major attack, the Americans might not have enough ammunition to stop it. And the weather prevented resupply. The plan had been to airdrop supplies, but thick fog and clouds covered Bastogne. Supply planes couldn't see the drop zones. Day after day, the soldiers looked up at the gray sky, hoping to see American planes. But the sky stayed empty. On December 22nd, the 4th day of the siege, the Germans sent a delegation under a white flag to the American lines. They carried a surrender demand. It was written in formal military language and basically said, "You're surrounded, you're outnumbered, you're cut off. Surrender now and you'll be treated as prisoners of war. If you don't surrender, we'll destroy you." The message was brought to General McAuliffe at his headquarters in the basement of a barracks in Bastogne. McAuliffe read it, thought for a moment, then said one word: nuts. His staff thought that was perfect. It captured the defiant American spirit. They typed up an official reply. To the German commander, nuts. The American commander. The Germans didn't understand the slang. When the reply was delivered, they asked the American officers what it meant. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Harper explained, "It means go to hell. And in case you need it translated further, it means we're not surrendering. If you want Bastogne, come and take it." That one-word reply became famous. It was exactly the kind of response Americans loved: defiant, colorful, unmistakably American. When the story got out, nuts became a rallying cry. But the situation inside Bastogne was anything but funny. The soldiers were hungry, freezing, low on ammunition, and surrounded by German forces that outnumbered them significantly. The wounded were suffering horribly, and still the Germans kept attacking. Private First Class Cletus Schwab from Minnesota was defending a position north of Bastogne. He said, "They came at us with tanks. We had one bazooka with 3 rounds. 3 rounds to stop German tanks. We waited until the first tank was so close we could see the driver, then fired. Hit it. It stopped. The other tanks pulled back. We'd bought ourselves a few more hours, but we were down to 2 rounds." The airborne surgeons were performing miracles with almost nothing. Major Douglas Davidson, a surgeon with the 101st, later described the conditions. "We were operating in a basement by candlelight, no heat. We were running out of everything. No more plasma for blood loss, no morphine for pain. We were using tablecloths for bandages, and the wounded kept coming. Men with terrible injuries that we couldn't properly treat, and they didn't complain. They'd say, 'Doc, take care of the other guy first. He's worse off than me.' I've never seen such courage." On December 23rd, the weather finally broke. The fog lifted, the clouds parted, and suddenly the sky was full of American planes. C-47 transport planes flying at low altitude, dropping supplies by parachute. Hundreds of planes, thousands of parachutes filling the sky. The soldiers in Bastogne cheered. They ran out of their foxholes to gather the supplies: food, ammunition, medical supplies. The paradrops weren't perfect. Some supplies landed outside the perimeter, and the Germans got them. Some parachutes didn't open, and the supplies were destroyed. But enough got through to make a difference.
Along with the supply planes came fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts that attacked German positions around Bastogne. The American soldiers watched as the fighters strafed German tanks and artillery. For the first time in days, they felt hope. But the Germans weren't giving up. They launched more attacks, trying to break into Bastogne before American reinforcements could arrive. The fighting intensified. Every position around the perimeter came under attack. The Americans held, but barely. Staff Sergeant Paul Fussell, who was there, later wrote, "We held not because we were supplied or reinforced, but because we refused to give up. Every man knew that if we lost Bastogne, the German offensive might succeed. We knew we had to hold, no matter what. So we held." The breaking point came on Christmas Eve. The Germans launched a major attack on the southern perimeter, hitting the positions held by the 327th Glider Infantry. German tanks broke through the initial positions. For a few hours, it looked like the Germans might break the perimeter. But the Americans held. Tank destroyers knocked out the German tanks at point-blank range. Infantry counterattacked with bazookas and grenades. By Christmas morning, the attack had been stopped. The perimeter held. Christmas Day, 1945 in Bastogne was surreal. The soldiers tried to celebrate as best they could. They sang Christmas carols in their foxholes. Officers made sure every man got a hot meal. The supplies from the airdrops made it possible. Some units held brief religious services. But the Germans were still out there, still attacking, still trying to break through. Christmas in Bastogne was white with snow and red with blood. Meanwhile, outside the perimeter, American forces were fighting to break through to Bastogne. General Patton's Third Army had turned north and was pushing toward the town, but they were fighting through tough German defenses and terrible winter weather. Every mile was a struggle. On December 26th, the 6th day of the siege, tanks from Patton's 4th Armored Division finally broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. The soldiers who'd held Bastogne for 6 days, surrounded and outnumbered, were finally relieved. When the first American tanks rolled into Bastogne, the paratroopers cheered, but not too loudly. They were exhausted. Private Webster from Easy Company later wrote, "When Patton's tanks arrived, we were happy to see them, but we were also proud. We'd held. We'd done what we were ordered to do. We held Bastogne."
The battle for Bastogne wasn't over. The Germans would continue attacking for weeks, and the 101st would stay in the line fighting. But the critical moment had passed. The Germans had needed to take Bastogne quickly to keep their offensive moving. The 101st had denied them that. By holding Bastogne, the Americans had blunted the entire German offensive. The cost was heavy. The 101st Airborne suffered over 2,000 casualties during the siege, killed, wounded, or missing. Other units fighting around Bastogne suffered similar losses. The town itself was heavily damaged, but they'd accomplished the mission. After the battle, General Eisenhower visited Bastogne to meet with the men who'd held it. He shook hands with soldiers, thanked them personally. He knew what they'd done. They'd held a critical position against overwhelming odds and in terrible conditions. General McAuliffe became famous for his nuts reply, but he always deflected credit to his soldiers. He'd say, "I didn't hold Bastogne, the soldiers held it. I just had the easy job of telling the Germans no." The soldiers of the 101st became known as the battered bastards of Bastogne. They wore the nickname with pride. They'd been surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, freezing, starving, and low on ammunition, and they'd held. Years later, veterans of Bastogne would talk about that battle as their defining moment. Not D-Day, not Holland, but Bastogne. Because Bastogne tested everything: their training, their courage, their endurance, their will to fight. And they'd passed the test. Private First Class Robert Bowen from Texas summed it up. "At Bastogne, we learned what we were made of. We learned we could take anything the Germans threw at us and still stand. We learned we could survive on nothing and still fight. Most importantly, we learned we could count on each other. When everything else was gone, food, ammunition, hope, we still had each other, and that was enough."
Today, if you visit Bastogne, there's a museum and memorials dedicated to the battle. Every December, the town holds ceremonies to remember the Americans who fought there. The Belgian people never forgot what the 101st Airborne did for them in that frozen December of 1944. In the center of Bastogne stands a monument, the Martison Memorial, shaped like a 5-pointed American star. On its walls are inscribed the names of the American units that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. At the top, visible from miles, is a simple inscription: "The Belgian people remember their American liberators." The soldiers who held Bastogne weren't superhuman. They got scared. They got cold and hungry. They wondered if they'd survive. But when the Germans said surrender, they said nuts. And when the Germans attacked, they fought back. And when things looked darkest, they held their ground. That's the American soldier. Not because they're fearless. Everyone feels fear. Not because war is glorious. It's not. But because when it matters most, when everything is on the line, they do their duty. They stand their ground. They don't give up. December 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. 6 days surrounded. 6 days of cold, hunger, fear, and constant combat. 6 days that showed the world what American soldiers are made of. Thank you for listening. And never forget what those battered bastards of Bastogne did in that frozen December so long ago. December 1944. The Belgian town of Bastogne became a frozen hell. Surrounded by German forces, outnumbered, outgunned, and freezing to death, the men of the 101st Airborne Division stood their ground. They had no winter gear, no food, almost no ammunition, but they had one thing left: the will to fight. Over 19,000 American soldiers were killed in the Battle of the Bulge. More than 47,000 were wounded. Tens of thousands of civilians were left homeless, starving, and broken. War doesn't make heroes. It destroys them. And those who start wars are nothing but cowards and monsters in human skin. Dedicated to every soul that froze, bled, and suffered in Bastogne.